Hello and good morning, everybody, and thanks for logging on to this meeting. I can see there's still people coming in, but I think we'll just start out slowly and have a bit of introduction initially, and then gradually people can log on and take part in the presentation and in the discussion afterwards. I think that should be fine. I am Martin Thorso from the Department of Agroecology at Aarhus University, and I've been coordinating this internal project under the EDP Soil program called Road for Schemes for the past 2 years. Today is like our final seminar where we plan to present our main conclusion from the project, but also discuss opportunities for going onwards with an implementation of carbon farming in Europe. The program for today is that initially I will introduce our overall approach to the project, some of the main concepts and ideas that we've had regarding carbon farming, definition, rules, governance. Afterwards, Bert Schmidt from Wageningen will introduce the current status of carbon farming in Europe based on an inventory of carbon farming schemes that we have acquired during the project. After Bert, Stefan from INRA will take over and dive into some of the more economic aspects of carbon farming. Morten will be there subsequently from my department at Agroecology, talking about the social and socioeconomic aspects of carbon farming. And towards the end of the first session, Jenny van der Kolk from Wageningen will talk about some of the factors of success and concern when it comes to payments, measurement, reporting, and verification of MRV systems for carbon farming. After this sort of initial presentation of the project result, we will have a small break, and Irene from CREA will introduce some ideas we have about a policy brief for carbon farming schemes and scheme design, also based on some experiences from outside Europe. And Andreas will afterwards present a proposal for a roadmap for carbon farming that we can discuss towards the end of the day. Because it's also important that we use this occasion to discuss amongst ourselves as a research community, but also with all of you who have joined in for the meeting. How can we advance carbon farming in Europe? How can we encourage farmers to take up carbon farming practices in an effort to mitigate climate change in the agricultural sector? So thanks a lot for tuning in, and we hope that this will be a very interesting day for all of us. And as you can see, based on the titles of the presentation, Road for Schemes is a very cross-disciplinary project. So we have tried to work with carbon farming from a political science perspective, a social science perspective, an economic perspective, and an agronomist perspective, and trying to integrate insights from these different disciplines in our understanding of carbon farming and opportunities for advancing carbon farming in Europe. A few housekeeping rules. There were more than 230 people signed up for this meeting. And we apologize if there was a problem with the link. I hope as many of you have not experienced that as a big problem. But since there will be a lot of us in the room, please keep your microphone muted at all times unless you're talking. And we would also very much like to hear your questions. So please ask them in the chat in writing, and we will provide also a written response after the presentations. And if we do not manage to address all these questions continuously, and if you agree with a particular comment or a question, please just indicate with a thumbs up. And we also have an idea about how widespread opinions are. So that would be great. And we also take the opportunity towards the end of the day, where there's a discussion, to gather some of these different questions that are more broad and general and discuss in the audience. First of all, an introduction to the Road for Schemes project. There are 10 partners involved: Denmark, Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, the Czech Republic, Austria, Switzerland, France, Italy, and Turkey. So widely across Europe, we are represented by partners of the EDP Soil Consortia in this assessment of carbon farming schemes. And the objectives of the project has been to assess the strengths and weaknesses of different design options for carbon farming schemes, and also look into opportunities for integrating different environmental ecosystem services in the design of carbon farming schemes. Afterwards, we have conducted an assessment of stakeholders' perception of different strategies for carbon farming schemes. And finally, we outline a roadmap for local and regional implementation of attractive and effective result-based schemes for carbon farming. And this project has been also embedded in sort of the overall European policy context that has actually evolved quite a bit since the beginning of our project, and that's quite remarkable. Even though we're just a 2-year project, but there's a lot has happened on the soil arena in the last couple of years, and it's been super interesting to follow, and also a timely project in the sense that the Commission has adopted or proposed a regulation for the certification of carbon removals, for instance, that sort of indicates that carbon farming has a prominent position in EU policymaking. And these carbon farming initiatives are also linked with the Green Claims Directive, for instance, that regulates how you can make announcements regarding green claims for products, but also Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that focus on companies' opportunities for reporting and the duties for reporting their performance on a range of environmental criteria. But importantly, the project started out based on the soil strategy that overall has the ambition of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions from Europe by 55% by 2030. And there's an increasing focus on soil in the strategy, both organic soils and mineral soils, and an objective of net removal of 310 megatons of CO2 equivalents in the land sector, and achieving climate neutrality by 2035. So it's an ambitious goal we have for the land sector in Europe. And it's also important that we sort of consider how we can use farming and support our farming activities as a lever to reaching these goals. And some of the initiatives that the Commission has adopted is this Sustainable Carbon Cycles initiative that support carbon farming in various ways. There's the framework. There's also relatedly the nature restoration law that are especially relevant when it comes to peatlands and targets for peatland restoration. And we are also situated in the EDP soil program that's going on in the 5 years after 2020, with the 26 partners from 24 European countries, and quite a lot of soil scientists that are working with soil and also monitoring soil physical processes and all of that, aside from these more social institutional aspects that we are working with in the Road for Schemes project. First of all, just a look at some of the challenges that we have identified in the EDP soil, and it's also relevant in how we have designed our work in this project. And as you can see, when it comes to soil, soil organic carbon and the loss of soil organic carbon is identified as a main soil challenge across all European countries nearly, and also as a challenge where there's a lot of research gaps. So it's a super important area of focus when we have asked stakeholders. This is a combination of more than 800 stakeholders across Europe. And aside from that, there's a few other aspects that are super important in some regions, for instance, erosion, biodiversity loss, nutrient retention, and water storage capacity. But the loss of soil organic matter it's a big issue in all across Europe. When we talk about carbon farming, We have started out the project before the Commission proposed their proposal for a certification framework. So we have made this project based on this initial definition that outlines that carbon farming is a green business model that rewards land managers for taking up improved land management practices, resulting in the increase of carbon sequestration in living biomass, dead organic matter, and soils by enhancing carbon capture and/or by reducing the release of carbon into the atmosphere. And I think when we talk about these biophysical processes, it's important to emphasize that for the most part, within carbon farming, we don't have a long-term storage, or we can have a longer-term storage, but for the most part, it's not permanent storage that we are talking about when it comes to carbon farming. So that's also some of the challenges that we have been engaging with in this project. How can you work with the temporality of carbon storage and still be able to design some schemes that can deliver on climate mitigation? Some of the practices that the Commission has proposed for carbon farming is afforestation management practices like conservation agriculture, implementing catch crops or various changes to the production system, management of peatlands in rewetting and also paludiculture, agroforestry or various forms of mixed production system, and land use conversion, for instance, conversion to permanent grassland. And these are some of the practices that can be considered under this carbon farming umbrella. And when we talk about schemes, we define schemes as any voluntary agreement in which a farmer or a group of farmers commit themselves to apply carbon farming measures in return for a payment or a reward in any form. So not just economic payment, but also other forms of symbolic recognition or learning experience. And already when we started out the project, there was a lot of these different initiatives across Europe that are working with voluntary initiatives to carbon farming that we have also analyzed in the course of the project. And it's been super interesting to follow this because it's also an area where there's been a lot of evolution and a lot of initiatives from partners in the practice sector. Generally, when we look at carbon farming, there are two different types of incentives involved. There are the activity-based payments, where rewards are provided for implementing carbon farming measures, independent of the result that these measures achieve. So this is the form of payment that's typically involved when we talk about the Rural Development Program, for instance, where farmers are rewarded for the output of a particular activity, for instance, implementing a hectare of catch crops or the like. Opposed to that, we have a result-based carbon farming, where payments are rewarding for reducing the net greenhouse gas fluxes. So we are focusing on the outcome of these activities, and that, of course, requires a thorough monitoring of activities so that there can be established a link between the results that are delivered and the payments that are received by land managers. In the Rule for Schemes project, one of the first tasks has been developing an inventory of these carbon farming schemes that we have identified across Europe, and we have looked at more than 162 of these carbon farming schemes that are identified across Europe, and a couple of schemes beyond Europe that were interesting for us because we wanted to acquire some learning about how they design carbon farming schemes. And it's accessible online, and later in his presentation, Bert will dive more into this inventory. We have also conducted a more in-depth analysis of 40 selected schemes that were purposefully selected so that we would have a European coverage based on a maximum variation of different design options as a basis for illustrating different trade-offs of scheme design. Generally, we distinguish between three forms of carbon farming. First, we have the farm payments that are typical for instance, for the Rural Development Program, where a public funding body provides funding for farmers providing activities on their farm. We have funding in the corporate supply chains, where typically an agro-food company that embraces carbon farming provides some incentives for their farmers to have a superior performance when it comes to carbon sequestration. And based on that, provide a reward for these farmers that is then used as a basis for claiming a price premium in the food market. And we have seen a lot of these initiatives popping up in recent years. And then we have initiatives in the voluntary carbon market, where there's an external certifier that certifies carbon removal activities at farm and either provide farmers with a certificate or sell the certificates at the market. And when it comes to the European regulation on carbon farming removal certification, these are primarily the schemes that are relevant to talk about in that regard. But we have had a more broader view on carbon farming in our project. Yeah, and as you can see here, we have some characteristics of these three different approaches to carbon farming. Some of the scheme types that are involved when we talk about farm payments are primarily activity-based, whereas in the supply chain, there are more result-based schemes and also an approach on the entire farm as a basis for certification. Voluntary carbon markets have a range of different carbon farming schemes and in terms of how they provide payments. We can also see in terms of contract duration, they are typically short when it comes to farm payments. And in general, across these different scheme types, we rarely see schemes that have a duration of more than 10 years. So it's relatively short schemes. And also, for the most part, a very small price that is actually paid for these CO2 reductions. So in that sense, for the farmers, for the most part, a lot of these schemes may cover some of the costs of adopting some of these practices, but not necessarily much beyond. Yeah, and some concluding remarks from my presentation, and also building up on some of the things that will come afterwards. I can say that in the course of this project, we have seen a surge in the interest and initiatives about carbon farming in research, policymaking, and in practice. And it's been a really timely project in that sense, because we have been able to follow the process of policymaking and also practice development at a time when everybody's really interested in learning about carbon farming and also adopting various carbon farming practices. And we can also say that carbon farming scheme design is a very careful balancing act. There's various social, legal, economic, practical, and ecological considerations involved. And that's also why we have seen a plethora of different design options, as you can also see later in the day. In respect to the project, we can see it's ending this year. And we have 6 to 7 scientific papers that have been developed during the project, and they will be out in the next couple of years. But also, like a disclaimer, most of these publications are not published yet. So that's the basis of the content we are providing here today. We're sharing it early because it's also important that these conclusions from our work is disseminated and gets a life of its own in this time when there's a lot of important decisions that are being made regarding how to structure carbon farming in Europe. And it's all of our hope that today will be an interesting day for us, all of us, to exchange experiences and also discuss our project results with all of you guys that have logged on to this meeting. So thanks a lot for doing that, and thanks a lot for your attention so far. And with that, I will leave the floor to the next speaker.
Thank you, Martin. I guess it's my turn now, so I will share my screen.
Yeah, please do.
I have the impression that I should do something more now.
No, it's fine.
It's fine. You see it. You have a full screen now.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Martin, for your introduction. I will focus my presentation on the current status of carbon farming in Europe, together with Jenny van der Kolk and the whole team of people and also the other partners in Road for Schemes. We succeeded to do an inventory. So Martin has already given a definition of a scheme. We did that inventory together with the 10 partners in the consortium. I will show the result of the first inventory and draw some conclusions from that. Well, Martin already mentioned what a scheme is. That is any arrangement between land users and other parties about carbon sequestration and storage or reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And there is some form of compensation of costs or reward for the performance of that. So to start this project, we first wanted to see what's going on already, mainly in Europe, but also outside Europe. We looked at some schemes. So we did a first inventory of schemes based on public sources, so what you can find easily on internet, in reports, etc. And that led, as Martin already mentioned, to a list of 162 schemes in these countries. And that's also the focus of this project, of this presentation. Here you see, on the right, you see the partners of the EGP. So there were 10 partners of EGP involved in this project, but we tried to cover all the EGP partners that are there. So that's more than 10. To give the context of this inventory, Martin already showed it, that we did an in-depth analysis on 43 of those schemes. And that was done through...
I don't think the slides are moving. Yeah. Sorry.
Is there something going on wrong?
But we only see the first slide. The now it's moving. Yeah.
I'm not sure what's going on now, but someone repaired it. I see. I hope. Okay. You see now this slide.
Now it's gone completely, Bert.
Oh, okay, I try to share again.
Yeah, now it works.
Okay, good. As mentioned, we did an inventory from public resources, and then we did this in-depth analysis on 43 of the most promising carbon farming schemes in these countries that we looked at. That was done by interviewing the scheme holders for more information on the schemes. We scored the quality of the schemes based on those interview results, and the lessons from that are input for the roadmap, which the workshop today is about. So I would like to share some of the statistics that came from the first inventory from the public sources. The first one was about land use category. You see that about half of the schemes that we found were linked to arable farming or to grassland management. Agroforestry is also something that the people pay attention to, and also, not unimportantly, peatland. We see a lot of schemes that deal with peatland restoration. sometimes also combined with other types like biochar. Martin already mentioned the difference between action or result-based. See, a number of stakeholders would like result-based schemes, because result-based schemes are more or less a guarantee that people are paid, farmers are paid for what they do. And we see that about half of the schemes in our inventory were action-based. So that's clearly the majority, because in all these inventory parts, you see that some of the information that we were looking for was not known yet. 21% was result-based. Hybrid ones are also there, that people have a combination of action and result-based, and also combination even of action-based, result-based, and hybrid schemes we found in this inventory. Which measures do farmers take? Afforestation is an important one. Kitchen cover crops is also mentioned quite often. Manure and compost application, re-wetting, especially in these peatlands, is an important one. Also, making a transition to organic or regenerative farming can be such a measure. Grassland management, especially taking care that grassland is not renewed so often, is also an important measure that we found in our inventory. The implementation phase. Well, this inventory was done last year, and we see that things are going quite quickly now, but at that moment we saw that 55% of the schemes in the inventory had already been implemented. 20% was in the concept phase, and there was also one scheme in the inventory that failed, and that was an Austrian scheme that had been applied, at least that was what they tried in the Netherlands, but it turned out that legislation in the Netherlands did not allow the use of so much manure and carbon in the fields. So that was also something to learn from, and that the scheme in one country can work quite well, but perhaps it does not work everywhere in Europe. We also wanted to know if these schemes are certified somehow with a certificate or a label or an official document, and it turned out that almost half of these had indeed such a document, but a quarter of them did not have that. And well, for the roadmap, it can be important to know that a scheme is accepted also from a more official way, so that it has really a legal basis for farmers to get paid for it. Martin also mentioned already something, some information about public and private payments. Public payments from, for example, rural development programs. We saw in our inventory that almost half of the schemes in that inventory were paid in a private way. So mostly by value chain partners or by people or parties that paid on a voluntary carbon market basis. 1/3 was from a public source, and there was also 5% that had a mixed form of payment, public and private both. We also wanted to know if those schemes were only focused on carbon farming or whether there were more focuses, and it appeared that about 30% had multiple focuses. That means that more ecosystem services were also addressed in the scheme description, for example, biodiversity or water management. About the same percentage had no other focus than only carbon farming, And there's also in the public resources, we found that quite a number of schemes did not give information on that. We also wanted to know whether such schemes have co-benefits for the farmers, especially. And it appeared that 41% of these schemes indeed had some additional advantages for farmers, and were also mentioned in the scheme description. And for example, you can imagine that carbon farming has also a good influence on your soil quality, and that can give good results in yields or in water holding capacity and so on. So the overall impression from our first inventory is that there are many startups and pilot projects throughout Europe. However, on the official documents in the outside world, so the websites and so on, there's much information still not yet available. But that also has to do with the development of those schemes. And we saw that many of these schemes are still in the concept phase. Especially much information was missing on the impact on carbon sequestration, but also on the attractiveness for farmers. And of course, farmers are interested, at least in the Netherlands, we see that a lot of farmers are interested in carbon farming, but of course they want to know if it's attractive for them. On the other hand, we see that schemes are developing at the moment in a high speed. So there is a lot of energy among stakeholders, farmers, but also other stakeholders who want also in value chains that processing industry and so want to be sure that what has been done in sequestration of carbon, that they can include that in their reporting of what they do for the climate. That's part of the game, I would say. So I think there's a lot going on, and to be sure that that this will all be dealt with in the right way, it's good to have such an analysis. And by that, I will want to thank you for your interest. And if any questions are there, please feel free. Thank you.
Bert, thank you. Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, please.
What methods do you use to estimate carbon gain or carbon loss for a given management operation adopted by farmers, for example?
Yeah, that's thank you for your question. That is not always easy. There's this MRV, as we call it, measurement, reporting, and verification of what has been done. There are a lot of systems for that. The best thing, the ideal thing would be that you measure the carbon content of the soil that is in this program, in this scheme, at the beginning of the project, and later after 10, 15, 20 years, you do it again and you see a difference and you pay for that. But in practice, measurements of organic matter contents of soil is quite a difficult thing. And that means that there's a lot of variation in soils, and there is quite a large extent of uncertainty in these measurements. So that's quite a difficult thing. But in the Netherlands, at least, I'm from the Netherlands, we see that there are a number of methods now developed to do that as accurately as possible. And sometimes that's a combination of measurements and modeling. But that's still, I think that's still one of the main questions that has to be answered. Also, when we look to what the European Commission wants us to do in Europe, how to measure and how to be sure that the carbon that should be sequestered is really sequestered. Is that sufficient for the moment? It's quite a big question, in fact, but
Yeah, I understand. That is, I'm also currently working on measuring greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, grasslands, especially in Finland. So I understand, and that is why I
Yeah.
wanted to know what methods you guys have been adopting for it. Thank you.
thank you.
Yes, and thank you for the question. And then for all other who have questions, please post them in the chat and we can address them in writing, unless it's a quick one, meanwhile presentations. But apart from that, I think we should move on to the next presentation, which is Stefan.
Yeah, I share my screen. Where is it? Sorry for that. You see my screen
Yep.
in full mode? Is it in full mode?
Yes.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you, Bert. Thank you, Martin. So I'm Stéphane de Carat. I'm with INRAE in France in a unit for named Paris-Saclay Applied Economics. And I will cover not all, but some of the economic aspects of carbon farming schemes. We have had a great introduction in the last two presentations. And the work I will present it is also the result of collaborations with my colleagues, in particular at INRAE. Laure Damien is there, but also other colleagues there. Okay, so I will not cover all the dimensions, the economic dimensions of the carbon farming schemes, but I will focus in my presentation on something that Martin mentioned in his introduction, the importance of the design, and especially the difference between result-based and activity-based or action-based schemes. The conventional view goes like that. It's usually admitted that result-based carbon farming schemes dominate option or activity-based schemes. Why that? Because they're seen as providing higher environmental effectiveness, because we don't pay for just efforts, but actually results. That's what we aim for. They're supposed to be less vulnerable to greenwashing criticism. For the same reason, they give more flexibility for farmers. And from an economic standpoint, they're also the best, or the most important feature is that they provide incentives to achieve cost effectiveness through a better allocation of efforts or resources across agents or farmers, or in space as well. So that's the conventional view, but there are bats, some bats that the first one is that it's very difficult to draw a clear line between pure action-based or activity-based schemes and pure result-based schemes, because to some extent, and especially in the case of carbon sequestration, the environmental outcome, the results, they do rely at some point on some estimates or models, or if you think about carbon sequestration, you can think about soil sampling to do soil analysis. There's always some remaining uncertainty surrounding the results. So there's something like a gray zone between the two, and we will explore that. Second, as it has been mentioned before, if you go result-based, you need to measure, and measuring is costly and probably more costly than measuring action or activities. So it entails MRV costs. And of course, those costs depend on what you do on the ground, whether you go through soil analysis, remote sensing models, whatever. So they can vary a lot across the different system you implement. And also they're likely to increase with the desired level of precision. If you think again about sampling, the more sampling points you collect, the higher the precision, but also the higher the cost. Something that is, I think, very important and is that carbon farming schemes are voluntary schemes. So that means that adoption and uptake by farmers is key to obtain the 42 million tons that Martin mentioned in the introduction. So we do not only need fancy, super precise carbon farming schemes, we also need carbon farmers to achieve those targets and to contribute effectively to the mitigation targets. And since they are voluntary, we have to account for the incentives of farmers to join in. So that's an important part. And also, result-based schemes, they do transfer some of the risk to the farmers because the results, the environmental outcomes, may depend on variables that are beyond the farmer's control. So in the end, what's going to be achieved is not maybe uncertain to the farmer as well, and involve some risk. And this may decrease the incentives to adopt carbon farming schemes. So as you see, there are important trade-offs, and as economists, we are always very interested in trade-offs. There is, of course, the trade-off between what you gain in terms of cost effectiveness versus the MRV costs. This trade-off has been well researched in the literature so far. There is a trade-off also between uncertain gains and certain gains for the farmers, which has received less attention in the literature. And in the end, you're facing a trade-off between more risky or costly schemes, but with low adoption on the one hand, and on the other hand, maybe less risky, less costly schemes, depending on their design, but with maybe higher adoption rates. So that's what we explore. What we have explored in the course of the project, playing with the design of the carbon farming schemes, and especially considering hybrid schemes that may combine payments that are similar to those related to activity-based schemes, meaning that you receive, as a farmer, you can receive money depending on the fact that you implemented some practice, but with an uncertainty discount that will reflect the fact that the actual outcome might not be equal to the expected one on average. So, and some of these hybrid schemes are similar to what you can see, for instance, in the Label Bas Carbone in France, where you have this option to go for such hybrid schemes. And the idea there is to leave the choice to farmers between going hybrid with a certainty discount, so getting a certain payment, a payment with certainty, but with a discount, and result-based, where you get a higher payment, but with risk. And the questions we're looking at are the implications in terms of risk for farmers, the main drivers of the farmers' choices, and their implications in terms of adoption. So I will not go into the detail of the models and on the model, but I will give you a quick overview of that and the results. So first, that's a paper that is still to be submitted, but it's close to be submitted. Mainly, so that's a joint work, but Roxane Fotino-Delis, PhD student that was supported partly with the Road for Scheme project. So that's one paper of her PhD. So that's a simple analytical microeconomic framework. You have a costly practice over a given time horizon. In the simulations I will show, that's 10 years. That's in the range of what Martin presented before. You have an environmental outcome, which is the additional carbon sequestration. So at the beginning of at the time of the decision whether to join or not the scheme, you only know the distribution and not the effective outcome at the end of the time horizon after the 10 years. There is costly MRV that allow to detect the environmental impact, but only ex post. So you know after 10 years what has actually been achieved in terms of carbon sequestration. And we introduce, and that's an important part, risk-averse farmers. So for the same expected income, farmers will prefer certain payments rather than uncertain payments. And farmers are given the choice between two things. First, they can adopt or not the scheme. And if they adopt, they can choose between a result-based payment, and that's where the payment will be conditional on what has been achieved ex post. So the payment at the time of joining the scheme is uncertain, and only the distribution is known. Or hybrid payment, where the farmer gets a certain amount of money based on the expected additional carbon sequestration, but has to pay a discount for the risk of not delivering the expected results. And this is complemented with an empirical application that we based on data from long-term experiments in Ultuna Sweden, in this case, with a given practice. And the results were for the carbon sequestration development over time were obtained from four models, different models that simulate the accumulation of soil organic carbon. And we did a lot of simulations based on a wide range of assumptions regarding the cost of implementing the practice, the MRV cost, the uncertainty discounts, the risk aversion, and the time horizon. Just a quick overview of the results. Here you have the certainty equivalence of result-based payments. So that's actually the payments that farmers get minus the premium, the risk premium that they face, and the risk premium depends on their risk aversion. So you have three types of farmers: low risk aversion, medium risk aversion, high risk aversion, and different assumptions regarding soil analysis costs and implementation costs. And here on the x-axis for each chart, you see the level of the payment in euro per ton of CO2 equivalent. And what you can see here is, of course, and zero is actually the income that you get with certainty, of course, if you do not adopt the practice, or if you do not adopt the scheme at all. So you see that depending on the costs and depending on the risk aversion, if the payment is too low, farmers are better off not joining the scheme rather than taking it. And it takes a certain, the intuition is simple there, but straightforward, but it takes a certain amount of payment for the farmers to go above the zero line there and then have an incentive to join the scheme. Okay, the more interesting thing is the role of risk aversion, because as you see to the right, on the right panel, when you have a high risk aversion for the farmers, so farmers do not like risk at all, you see that as the payment increase, you may have the incentive to join a result-based payment that decreases. Why is that? Because as the payment increase, actually it magnifies the risk for farmers and because the environmental outcome is uncertain. So above, let's say, 50 to 55 euros per ton of CO2 equivalent, depending on a bit on the costs there, on the implementation and analysis costs, you may have the incentives to join the scheme that decreases past that threshold. Now, if we look at the choice between result-based and activity-based schemes, you have the same kind of mechanisms at play. Here again, you have low risk aversion, medium risk aversion, and high risk aversion farmers, and for different level of payments. But here on the y-axis, you have the level of the uncertainty discount factor. So the higher the uncertainty discount, the lower is the incentives to go for an activity-based scheme. And depending on this combination of the discount factor and uncertainty discount factor and payment, you may have, of course, for low payments, you have no adoption, so farmers prefer to stay out. But then, depending on the payment and the uncertainty discount factor, you may have the choice between. You may have either the incentives to go for result-based. I'm colorblind, but I think it's blue there, and model-based, which is the activity-based. The way we simulated activity-based schemes. So, what do we take from this? 4 key messages. First, the attitude towards risk matters for the adoption of for both the adoption of carbon farming schemes and the design of carbon farming schemes. Because if you go result-based, which is supposed to be a better way to go, you do transfer risk to farmers, and doing so, you may deter adoption. Under low carbon, the second message is that if the carbon payments are low, even if you have a large uncertainty discount, non-adoption may be an issue. So you may end up in a situation where you have no carbon farmers. You may have good schemes, but no carbon farmers. No good carbon farming schemes, but no carbon farmers. And one thing that came up also with the study is that I think that's quite important. The higher the payments, the higher you magnify the risk for the farmers, and that's maybe detrimental to adoption. And also the last key message I want to convey there is that the opening the possibility for farmers to choose between hybrid schemes may enhance the adoption of carbon farming schemes. But if you do so, because it's difficult to know beforehand the risk aversions of farmers, so by letting them choose, you let them reveal themselves, and it might be better for the society as a whole. But doing for hybrid schemes, or such schemes come inevitably with the probability of paying some carbon payments that in the end will not be realized. And I just want to 2 points of discussion to finish with 2 points of discussions. Of course, the model here is very stylized, very simple. That's a simple representation of especially of the farmer's attitude toward risk. There are challenges regarding the parameterization of risk aversion. That's a whole field of research field, and it's not easy enough. If I ask you what's your risk aversion parameter, I'm not sure you would be able to answer right away. I wouldn't be myself. There are it's possible to have a more general representation of this, but still, I think that the main mechanism at play is captured by even a simple model here. And the model here is generic in the sense that it represents the decision of a farmer. But what matters in terms of policy making is to account for the heterogeneity among agents, both in terms of attitude towards waste, but also in terms of specific costs, specific carbon sequestration potential and everything, and other variables that are important for those choices. And from a policymaker perspective, to maximize the overall cost effectiveness, you have to harness this heterogeneity and the possibility of leaving the option to choose different designs, or farmers being able to choose between different designs, may enable you to harness some of this cost effectiveness gains. But of course, the more flexibility you leave there, the more possible undue payments you allow at a larger scale. So here again, you have a trade-off from the policymaker's perspective. And with that, I will leave the floor. I'm not sure for the next speaker because there is a break, but and maybe also for questions.
The next speaker is Morten. And if you have questions, please post them in the chat and we'll address them continuously. And Morten can just start off.
There's more for quick.
Yeah, now time is running. I hope we can maybe take a bit of the break, so I don't have 5 minutes. I need a little more time, I think, than 5 minutes, but according to the schedule. Yeah, can you see my screen? I don't see. Yeah, can you see it?
Yeah.
But it's not in now it's in presenters mode.
It's okay? Okay. I can't see you, but I can see the slides. Okay. Yeah, thank you, and hello, and good morning to everybody. Nice to see there's so many people attending this online meeting. I'm presenting work from the work package 3 in Road for Schemes project. It's work that's done together with colleagues from Aarhus University, so Martin and also Kasper and other from Aarhus, but also in connection with Claudia Heidegger and Susanne Hünde from the Thünen Institute, and of course all the partners in the Road for Schemes project. But this work is presentation is made by me and Claudia and Susanne. They were not able to join it today, but I should remember to say hello to everybody from Claudia and Susanne. So in the Road for Schemes project, we have had this work package on enabling conditions for practitioners and policymakers, and it's divided in 2 separate tasks. One task about the land users' perspective on carbon farming and result-based schemes, so a more qualitative study, and then a second study on the status and current political considerations on carbon farming in selected European countries, which the Thünen Institute was responsible for. So I'll go through these 2 tasks and the results that we are working on, 2 different and perhaps 3 different publications based on this work. The first part, so the more qualitative part, but also the other one is the reason is that we need some more knowledge on these land users, and also you could hear from Stefan and the others that we have a lot of ideas of how it works on a theoretical level, and we have all these schemes, but how do the land users, so the farmers and other landowners, actually understand and perceive and use these so both the soil carbon management practices, but also these carbon farming schemes, and also we needed to gain a little more or better knowledge on different design options, as Martin also presented, of these carbon farming schemes. So and then additionally, there's also a need for better knowledge on some of these requirements and conditions for integrating carbon farming activities more successfully into the existing climate policy framework. So even though the topic of my presentation was social and socio-economic consideration, I would say it's more social and policy considerations that we've been working on in this work package. So the first part was this qualitative study, and we conducted these focus groups and also had some national workshops with the different stakeholders. The focus groups we had in almost all the partner countries, so Turkey, Denmark, all the ones that have been listed before, and then we had 2 focus groups in the Netherlands, one with both arable farmers and one with only dairy farmers, and we had these national workshops. And of course, why have these focus groups? It's something that we've done before, and it gives it's of course the context is the farmers that are landowners that you have gathered, and it's the interaction and the discussions that you have in this group that is the key outcome. So it says something about the group's discussions, and then we try to learn from that. The first part of so these focus groups had a lot of different discussion topics, but the first part was what is the relevance of these carbon farming practices, and the ones that we discussed in most places were a list of 14 different carbon farming practices. They are listed here. I won't go through all of them, but some of them are on-farm measures and others are on a landscape measure, and that's also, I think, important to understand that some of them are something that you can work on your own land, and others are actually something you need to work in a collaborative effort. If you are re-wetting, it goes towards different farm plots and farmers, right? And then besides discussing the relevance of these carbon farming practices, we also discussed the relevance of having more result-based carbon farming schemes. So Martin explained very good the difference between activity-based schemes and result-based schemes. So we presented these differences to these farmer groups, and you can see some pictures from the Danish setting, and I think it's from the Flanders setting, also the picture where we had these discussion points with mainly farmers or landowners. So there is a lot of elaborative material that we are trying to synthesize from all of these 8 focus groups. But a summary, I made a summary here of the interest in and adaptability of the practices, so the carbon farming practices, and this goes overall without specific reference to any of the countries, you could say. But there's 4 different learning points. So we found actually a strong interest in having more carbon farming practice on farms, but also interest in adaptability. So, for example, practice like cover crops, manure management, and crop residues, they are something that is already commonly adopted among many of them, but there is also interest in practice such as reduced tillage and manure application in general. We found an interest in soil health beyond just carbon farming, and many farmers emphasize the importance of having practice that address multiple benefits, both soil erosion control. There's like someone not muted. Maybe Simone can, yeah, super, thank you. Soil fertility improvement and water retention capacity. And of course it differs depending on the context and landscape and setting you're in. But also we found that there's a need for legislative and subsidy support, so policy support. And of course, this is what we hear in other cases also, that they express a need for these voluntary legislative and subsidy support to try to get this adopted and rolled out. But also need for more collaboration and knowledge sharing. There is a high interest in cooperation between the different types of farmers to enhance both biomass, but also these implement these carbon farming practices. But there is a need for more knowledge sharing platforms and ways of trying to streamline these support actions for transition towards much more carbon farming. So an overall interest in carbon farming practices, but of course a highlight of the need of more support, both in terms of economic support, but also in the governance structures, you could say, and in the knowledge sharing platforms. And I know since this project started, there's a lot of new projects going on with both all these ideas of living labs and lighthouses and other ideas of trying to help this adoption of these practices being rolled out. And then so that was the first point of discussion. We also discussed the relevance of these more result-based carbon farming schemes. And here we could see a more mixed picture in terms of the interest among land users towards having more result-based schemes. We found a higher interest in a few countries, and that was mainly related to that those landowners or farmers could see that this could be a possibility for a higher income, right? So they are not seen as an incentive in itself, but more as a potential additional revenue. So that was in the places where we saw a very high interest in these more result-based carbon farming schemes. The lower interest we found in some countries and in some of the focus groups were mainly because there is a lot of concerns, and much of that is related to uncertainty at all kinds of levels. So of course, uncertainty related to lack of knowledge about the monitoring. So for example, it's still unclear where, when, and how often should soil samples, for example, be taken. There's concerns about the cost of these monitoring. Concerns about, okay, what about these weather extremes? Who should bear the cost of a farmer losing a crop or losing this carbon farming revenue from a result-based scheme? So a mixed picture when we discussed these result-based schemes, and it's much related to this about risk and farmers seeing themselves in this setting of uncertainty. So this raised a lot of questions that we are working on now. So and should be worked on in the research community, you could say. For example, do we have enough knowledge to measure and document these result-based schemes more accurately? Are the payments reliable in the long term, and is there a basis of trust? So trust was a discussion point a lot. Are farmers getting a fair share of the value added when we have these more result-based schemes? So, and how much is going to the suppliers, the food companies, which is growing larger and larger, right? Retailers and so on. The certification to MRV, how is the finance directed towards these different stakeholders in this new value chain of carbon farming? Also, the risk of liability in case of if you don't achieve the result, should they all be bared by the farmer? How should we come about these risk things that increases also with weather extremes that we just saw this summer, especially we saw it in Denmark, but I know it's also other places with either more droughts or heavy rain and so on. And that can be a difficulty when you are implementing new practice. So that was the first part. So I think we had some. It was a difficult task to conduct all these different focus groups, but it worked out, and I think we had some nice discussions and learnings that we'll take further in the publication and onwards. Then Tynen and was in charge of this policy part about the status and current political considerations of carbon farming in the selected countries that we are working in. So here we had 2 expert surveys per country. So we had one survey for the experts that are responsible for the greenhouse gas inventory. So in Denmark, it's also researchers from Aarhus University, but a different department than ours, and other researchers that are responsible of this. And then we had a survey to the policymakers, or the ones in the policy sphere that are responsible for the agriculture, the LULUCF. For example, in Denmark, it was the Ministry of Agriculture, but we also had to send it to the Climate Ministry and these different agencies to get a good answer from these experts. We received answers from the eight countries out of the 9-10 countries that are part of this project. And here I'll show you some of the results. So we had a lot. I can't show everything, so it's just some few results from this work. So we asked about the relevance of carbon farming in the national climate policies, and the experts had to rank these different carbon farming practices, and you can see there's a mixed picture also again. Oh, my screen, sorry. Is my screen still on? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I have 2 screens, so it goes on. So in 5 of the countries, the first rank was the soil organic carbon, things, and in other countries it was peatland restoration. So a mixed picture, and in Denmark, biochar is the only country it was put as the first rank. So showing also a mixed picture in terms of what kind of practices are put into these national climate policies in terms of the land use sector. Sorry. Now it won't change. So what's happening here? Oh, there. Okay. Yes. Then we asked about reportability of carbon farming in these national greenhouse gas inventories. And as you see here, again, the different practices, so changes in SOC, like forestry, peatland, and biochar. Some of it is already being reported, some is being planned, and some is possible to monitor these policies. So also a mixed picture from the different member state countries. And we are still digging into these data on different reportabilities of these activities. Then we asked about the role of private initiatives. As you saw, there's earlier there is a mixed picture also in terms of private carbon farming schemes, but also these national. So we also asked them, how would you assess the current role of private initiatives in your country? And here you see there's a future potential for a lot of them, but also some impact and some places where the perspectives are being seen as a high relevance but also a low relevance. And then we asked about their knowledge of how much carbon credits from carbon farming has been created and also sold by private initiatives. And in some countries there was knowledge about this, and other countries, like in Denmark, for example, no knowledge from the policymakers was about how these credits are being created and sold. We asked, will carbon removal mitigation outcomes be achieved through such privately managed projects? And will they account towards national climate targets? In some countries, it's not been discussed yet, and others it's under discussion. And in Denmark and France, for example, it's part of the national climate targets. So a lot of good results from these surveys that we are still trying to brush up. But to summarize the surveys, so we had these MRV experts. According to them, many of the carbon farming measures are currently not fully reportable in the national greenhouse gas inventory, and they may not contribute to achieving these national climate targets. And since national and EU climate targets are quite ambitious, we expect that greenhouse gas inventories will be further improved to better reflect the carbon farming activities. And then for these private initiatives, it is of crucial to know what will be the basis for their future business models and how they can provide reliable and verifiable certificates. And also this is about additionality and double claiming. So EU should aim for providing such a framework. That's one of the discussion points we have in this paper. We also found that the Netherlands and France could potentially become frontrunners in how to combine both public and private activities. But still, there's a lot of open questions to this. How do we account for these private initiatives to the national climate targets, which is not fully considered yet? So that was my fast presentation, but and thank you. And then again, this is a joint work, and any questions, please put them in the chat or contact me or Claudia or Susanna for any other. Yeah, that's it. Still sharing my presentation? No, I think.
No.
Okay, super. Okay. Yes, so who's next?
I shall continue.
Yes, please.
Sorry, something doesn't go as I want to. Oh, no. It's not a good one. I think you can see my screen now.
Is it perfect?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Jenny van der Kolk, working at Wageningen University Research, and I present this on behalf of Bert and Karin as well. Maybe you have heard a lot of things that that has been told in the previous presentations, but then it's good to to have kind of summarized or proven that what they said, it's already there. I continue with the presentation that Bert gave. He explained that we did an inventory in all European countries, we did a second inventory. These are based on the most promising schemes that were in the first inventory, and it is kind of an in-depth study. It's an in-depth of the first inventory. We asked more questions than we did in the first inventory, and we scored them based on 6 categories: the general scheme information, the payment, and the bias information, the MRV, safeguards for the society and the environment, transparency, and the attractiveness. We ask ourselves why good scoring schemes are different from other scoring themes. And then we came that we wanted to have a closer look at the schemes that scored 2 points out of the 3, more than 2 points out of the 3, because that's what we said are the most promising and best scoring schemes. First, I want to compare. First, I want to compare it with the first inventory, the second inventory, so the total of the 43 and the top 23. So the first inventory, here you see the result-based and the action-based. And what you can see is that in the top 23, so the best scoring schemes, the result-based are higher than in the rest of the inventories. And this is also what we have learned already from the previous presentations. Secondly, we wanted to have a look at the private and the public paid schemes. Here, the private paid schemes are the schemes paid on a voluntary market, and also the commodity-based payments, as Martin explained in his first presentation. And what you see here is that that there's not that much different in this overview. What you see is that the private paid schemes are a little bit higher, but the public schemes are less in the top 23 schemes that are in the best scoring schemes. Then we also had a closer look at if there's a multiple focus of the scheme. And also here you see that there's not a big difference between the first inventory with all schemes involved, private, public, result-based, action-based. But here you see that in the top 23, the highest scoring schemes have more often a multiple focus. That's what you see. Then there's, how can you prove that there's carbon sequestration? The most general way to do it is to take the soil samples. This is for the best schemes, so the top 23. And here you see that there's in more than half of the schemes, there's no soil sampling. So this is not a general thing to do to have the soil sampling included in the scheme. As you can see in the action-based schemes, there's more often that there's no soil sampling, because that's kind of logic, because in the result-based schemes you see quite as often as there is soil sampling as there is no soil sampling. Then we go to the leakage and trade-offs, because that's important, that we have to have insight if there's no leakage and there's no trade-offs, if there's carbon sequestration or avoiding of emissions of carbon emission to the soil. First, the leakage, it's not taken into account in the top 23 scoring schemes. Sometimes there is, but more often there isn't. The trade-offs are, as much as there it is included, it's not included, so that there's something to gain, I think, for this purpose. The multiple focus is more often in the top 23. There is a multiple focus, and if you combine these figures, then you see this. There's hardly any leakage involved in these schemes, but there's hardly any difference as well for if there's a multiple focus or not. And that's the same for the trade-offs. There is more often trade-offs involved in the schemes, but there's no difference if it's a multiple focus scheme or not. Then we go to the attractiveness of the schemes, because we can think about the schemes from a scientific point of view, but it's the farmers, the policymakers, and in case of the voluntary, the private schemes, that the funders also have to be, to know what to do with it and to like it. Here you see the attractiveness for farmers, for policymakers, and for the funders. What you see is that there's an attractiveness for the farmers. Yes, there is. There's hardly any scheme that's not attractive for the farmers, but that's the same for the policymakers and for the funders. If you combine these schemes, then you with the result-based or the hybrid schemes and the action-based schemes, then you see that the farmers they like it more, the action-based schemes. The policymakers even also like more the action-based schemes. Even though that it's promoted that there should be a result-based scheme, that's they like more the action-based schemes. That makes, to come to the conclusions of the work. The result-based schemes score better than the action-based schemes. Private schemes have a better score than action-based, that should be public schemes. But most private schemes are result-based and more public schemes are action-based. It's not always the case because there's, some action-based schemes are also paid with private funding. But farmers see action-based as more attractive. That means, and I saw it in a workshop the other day we held in the Netherlands, that farmers' organization even pilot with private funding and action result-based. And if you really ask them, they are more attracted to the action-based scheme. What you also see is that even though soil sampling is essential for result-based, but it's not included at the moment in the most promising schemes. We also have to look at sustainability, and leakage and trade-offs are examples of sustainability. They're often not included yet in the schemes. Schemes with a multiple focus don't score higher than with only carbon sequestration, even though in this workshop I mentioned most people, they prefer the multiple focus, but it's not included yet. And even if they like it, maybe it's better only to focus on the carbon sequestration because that's difficult enough. And also based on this research, I think that regional approach is very useful. We did a lot of more work, but these are the main outcomes, so I will leave it to this. Thank you for your attention. Are there any questions, or is there no time for the questions? So now I can see you.
No, questions will be answered on the chat only.
Okay. Then I give the floor to Martin.
Yeah, I think for now we have a small break, and I think Andreas has prepared an intermission slide, and I don't know what you've written in terms of when we reconvene.
Well, we should stay for 15 minutes break, I think. Yeah. Until 10:45. Yeah.
Thank you.
See you in 15 minutes then.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. See you.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, but the wrong one,
Okay.
I'm afraid. Yeah, this is the right. Perfect.
Yes, hello everybody, and welcome back. And let's reconvene. And for now, Irene will introduce our ideas regarding a policy brief for carbon farming schemes. And I think your presentation now is in the right mode. So please go ahead, Irene.
Okay, so thank you very much. So in order to provide some policy recommendations about carbon farming schemes, for sure we have to first understand what is the European framework about carbon removals. So 1 year ago, the European Commission released the one proposal of regulation about carbon removals, as it was mentioned already by Martin. And for 1 year, there has been a discussion going on with public consultations, as well as an exchange with an expert group selected by the European Commission. Based on this discussion and some political discussion, in November 2023, so 1 year later, the European Council and the Parliament released the 2 amended texts, which are not final yet. So these 2 texts will be used for an interinstitutional discussion among the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council, the so-called trilogue. And so maybe we will have a final text which will be released at the beginning of 2024, because in June there will be the elections of the Parliament at the European level, so we have to release this text before that date. So today we will go through the regulation, we will propose some policy recommendations, and then we will see if these recommendations have been already included in the new amended text proposed by the Council and the Parliament. First of all, why do we need a carbon removal regulation? As Martin said, we have these compulsory carbon removal targets now at the European level of 310 million tons of CO2 equivalent that can be achieved in the agricultural and the forestry sector through carbon farming activities. And this target has been splitted for member states' targets. The second reason why we need a carbon removal regulation is that, as was mentioned by Bert and colleagues, we have at the moment in Europe at least 156 different schemes. And these schemes, they belong to different categories. So the regulation is referring to only the voluntary carbon markets, carbon farming schemes, but which are the majority actually at the moment in Europe. But still, inside this category, there are a lot of different schemes, and especially they apply different methodologies to measure the carbon removals. And therefore, these credits, they are not comparable. And most importantly, they are different in terms of quality of carbon removals, which is then sold on the market. The problem, if carbon credits are not comparable, the problem is that potential financiers, they have to spend time looking for the right one. And in the end, they might not choose the best one in terms of effectiveness for climate change mitigation. For this reason, the European Commission aims at developing one single methodology at the European level, which is based on the quality criteria, with the final aim of achieving a result-based carbon farming scheme in Europe, and also one single certification framework. For example, with one public registry at the European level. But let's understand what quality means. So inside the regulation, these quality criteria are at the moment developed in a very just with general indications. For a more deep insight, we have to wait for the delegated acts that will be released by the European Commission only after the regulation is approved. So we have to wait still for a few months. But at the moment, what we can see is that carbon removals correspond to several carbon pools, including biomass and mainly soil organic carbon, that can be measured in different ways. At the moment, the European Commission is stressing more attention on default values and remote sensing, while less attention is given to soil sampling because it's too expensive. But in the calculation, so carbon removals that are achieved by a project activity, they have to be compared with the baseline scenario, so the scenario where the project is not applied. And it is interesting to notice that other greenhouse gases emissions, so apart from soil organic carbons, so stored in soil or even in the biomass, greenhouse gases emission different from CO2, so nitrous oxide and methane at the moment are not included in the calculation, but they are only considered as co-benefits. Then let's look at the A, which means additionality and baseline. So for the baseline, it is important to highlight that the European Commission is talking about a standard baseline. So it is a baseline which generally refers to average regional, let's say, information about environmental, geographical, technological circumstances. So it is a very wide baseline. In terms of long-term storage, at the moment, the long-term storage is not defined. It's just generally referred to as long-term storage. So we don't say how many years. For the sustainability, which is the IT, the European Commission is highly ambitious because apart from achieving carbon removals, every project should guarantee the respect of 7 sustainability objectives in the environmental sector as well, like water protection and avoiding soil pollution. But this is one option. So this is what the European Commission is going forward. But abroad, there are other highly applied standards of carbon removals. For example, in the United States, Canada, Australia, and some of these, these standards, they are proposed by governmental bodies like in Europe. So it is interesting to compare the European case with them. And we can see that usually the most used, for example, quantification method for soil carbon is modeling coupled with soil sampling. While, as I said before, the European Commission is going maybe towards default values and remote sensing. Another example is the baseline. As I said before, in Europe, we are going for a standard baseline, while usually in these other extra European methodologies, we usually go for a baseline which is based on historical data at the farm level. So it's much more precise. Another reason why we need the carbon removal is the fact that not all carbon farming practices, they have the same efficacy in reaching carbon removals, and also they don't have the same cost for farmers. Based on a study we performed in the Road for Scheme framework, we observed, of course, that for all farmers that want to go for carbon farming practices, they have to face some costs. And therefore, they need incentives. The carbon credits, of course, can be one form of incentive. It is interesting also to observe that the most effective practices to achieve high carbon removals seems to be the land use change practices, meaning agroforestry, permanent pasture, afforestation. But these are also the most expensive in terms of euros per hectare faced by the farmer. What's inside the regulation about practices? At the moment, there is just a list of potential practices, which actually are just mentioned in the recitals of the regulation, quoting a communication of the European Commission, while there are no indications on the practices' removals effectiveness and cost efficiency. Another reason why we need this regulation is that carbon farming is not only achieved or supported by the voluntary carbon market, but also from the common agricultural policy. So these two policies, they can overlap. So the farmer should choose between the CAP maybe and the carbon credits, but also they can cooperate, they can sustain each other. And this interaction between policies can happen only if there is an official framework of policy also for carbon markets. It is interesting to notice that at the moment it seems more interesting for a farmer to go for the cap payments because they are higher compared to the carbon credits value, and the farmers have to face lower costs in terms, especially the so-called transaction costs, so the overall bureaucracy, let's say, to access these voluntary carbon markets. But in the future, if the value of credits will increase, it can be interesting for farmers to go for credits rather than cap payments, because credits are paid for the tons and not for the hectare of surface. So if you apply a highly effective carbon farming practices, such as the land use changes that we mentioned before, maybe land managers, they will go for this carbon credits instead of the cap payments. So based on all this information, we try to summarize some recommendations. So for the quality criteria, the main for the quantification of carbon in the soil and also from biomass, we highly suggest that at least avoided greenhouse gases emissions are included in the calculation. In terms of baseline, the main recommendation we have is that if we want to set up a standard baseline, which is also a regulatory baseline, the so-called GAEC, which are the good agricultural and environmental conditions of the CAP, can be taken as the regulatory baseline, because these are the minimum environmental protection level that all farmers have to apply in order to access CAP subsidies. And these are applied on around 90% of the European agricultural surface. So this is actually a baseline. In terms of long-term storage, we truly believe that it's important that permanence time is defined for each carbon farming practice. For the sustainability, even if we agree that it's important that farmers, they achieve not only carbon removals, that they protect the environment, overall environment aspects, it might be very costly to monitor all these sustainability criteria, and therefore it can be maybe, let's say that approved carbon sequestration project, they should be compliant with the already existing environmental regulations, which is already very strong, for example, in terms of water quality and soil pollution. From a certification and implementation level point of view, we believe that maybe we should set a minimum guaranteed price for carbon credits to ensure a minimum level of compensation for farmers and reduce their risk. And also stimulating the aggregation of multiple small-scale projects in bigger projects. This can help farmers to mitigate MRV costs and the risk of leakage and reversal that I didn't describe so well in this presentation, but you have heard of it before. In terms of interoperability with and support from the CAP, we believe that the current governance infrastructures that are taking care of CAP payments and CAP monitoring, they can be used also for the carbon credit issuance and monitoring. So the so-called information, administrative and control systems. Finally, the CAP can also contribute to MRV, to, let's say, carbon farming, because it can be through, let's say, support through investments for farmers to face the high initial costs of new carbon farming practices, and also spread know-how, and also spread the demonstrations in pilot projects such as the EIP operational groups and LEADER. Finally, just wanted to mention that in the new texts of the released by the Council and the European Parliament, one of our recommendations has been included already, which means that in the overall calculation of carbon removals, we don't count only for the soil carbon or the biomass carbon, but also for avoided GHG emissions, namely nitrous oxide and methane. But to have, of course, a final opinion on this regulation, we have to wait for the final regulation text and for the delegated acts. So I thank you for your attention. This was a collaboration among the CREA team in Italy and Martin. So thank you for your attention.
And also thank you to you, Erin. Yeah, you can stop sharing, please. And then afterwards, Andreas will present our proposal for how to move on with a roadmap. And I see there's also a lot of discussion going on in the chat, and we hope that we can address all of these comments during the meeting. In case we don't, we'll provide a written response afterwards. But thanks a lot for participating in the debate. It's super important bringing this forward.
Okay. So I'll try to share the screen as I want to. Yeah. So as Martin has already put out, we have tried to summarize somehow the results that have been gained by all the different work packages and to try to come up with a proposal for a roadmap to be applied in the different regions. So a very important thing is to be aware of the status quo that is in the individual regions. So Irene has already also put out the importance of regionality, so that we have to be aware of what is the status with respect to carbon farming. Do we have any existing systems here? You can have a look at this rather comprehensive stock take that we have made during the project. However, the outcome of all these things should be a setting of a guideline. And Irene has just informed you about the activities on European level, so that everything should be considered, or we hope that many of the things that we have discussed recently are considered. However, we see that there is a common interest. And we also have seen, especially from the last slides, that also public institutions should be involved to some extent, because if you have to have a roadmap or if you intend to have a roadmap, you have to have some control measures. So probably it's not only the private initiatives, but there should be kind of a coordinating institution, however this looks like, who sets the guidelines and who says which parts of a carbon farming scheme should be obligatory and what should be of importance. However, this should be then done according to this roadmap that we are proposing. So, as you have seen from the presentations, we have a very wide diversity of the schemes and approaches currently in Europe. However, the individual program has to be linked with the local framework. So one solution for all will not be possible, definitely. So what we have been thinking of was simply to develop a kind of a decision tree where all these important factors that you have heard about during the last presentations are considered in some way, so that it's possible for the local, for the regional, or maybe even for a national approach to have the most important factors and the most important things to be listed and analyzed. And in this way, it should be possible to then develop a kind of an ideal scheme that could serve as a role model for the local applications. Now, this decision tree should include, to our mind, the following points. We have to have common principles that should be obeyed by all these different schemes. We have to define the aim. So we have recently discussing, or Irene has been discussing the question of the baseline. And so this is also very important, because you have to consider also people that have been doing some important work already with respect to carbon sequestration. So what to do about these? So they should be considered as well to some extent. So the definition of the aim is also very important. Then you have to take into account the local characteristics. Of course, the preferred financing scheme, not everywhere probably will the same financing scheme be the ideal one. Then you have to say something about the measures and also the preferred validation. And finally, the reporting and of course, last but not least, the governance structure within this principles. So for the common principles, we have heard that additionally to the carbon sequestration, there are some other ideas to be considered, like the permanency, the ecosystem services, and additional co-benefits that could arise from the carbon sequestration. We also have heard that many of the farmers do not consider carbon sequestration as the main topic to some extent already. So they see the co-benefits as the more important factor in comparison to the carbon sequestration. However, the carbon sequestration is the thing that could be rewarded directly. So this has to be decided from area to area. And then, of course, how do we measure it? Do we have a result-based system or an action-based system or a combined system? So this is also something to be considered locally. As I've said before, we should definitely consider whether our aim is to increase or to stabilize the carbon content. So we have to take into account, for example, the changes that will take place with respect to the climate change. And we know that in some areas, due to the climate change, the carbon content will decrease definitely. So it's not, the function should not be in the first place to increase the carbon content, but more to stabilize the carbon content and to counteract the effects of the climate change. Of course, the general reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions is one major topic. Irene has mentioned it just a few minutes ago, or even the avoidance of the greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, some of the additional ecosystem services could also be part of this scheme. However, as we also have heard before, that this to some extent is not the main aim. So the ecosystem services are not so in the focus. And as I've just put out, I would prefer to have a kind of a dynamic baseline, which takes into account the natural developments of the individual local situations that we have. Now, the local characteristics should be of a very great importance, I think, for the further decisions. So you have to take into account the soil characteristics. You have to take into account the climate and the development of the climate, as I've said before. You also have to take into account the agricultural structure. So whether it's better to concentrate on the fields or whether it's better to concentrate on the farms or even to areas with respect to these measurements. And also the economic framework. So a lot has been said already about the economic frameworks and the economic circumstances that influence the acceptance and the decisions of the farmers. So this is also something that should be considered to a large extent. Then this is something you have also heard already. We have to think of the preferred financing scheme. So as we heard, there is the possibility for public payments directly to the farmer, for example, in the course of measures from the Common Agricultural Policy, which, for example, is a very important part of the payments in Austria. Then the second thing, and this is also something that might be of importance also in the future, is the exclusion directly in the supply chain, so that as Martin has already said, that the product itself would have a different price, and the farmers then share a part of this higher end product price to receive for their product. So this would also be something, maybe this is a system that has a future. So actually in Austria, we are just planning a bigger project with respect especially to this aspect. And then, of course, the voluntary carbon market, which is booming at the moment, I would say. And but however, especially this voluntary carbon market needs some regulations. So we are working on this, and also, of course, the European Commission and the European Union is working on this, because this is a very important thing, simply to set up certain rules that have to be obeyed. And last but not least, of course, the cost-benefit ratio, which has been mentioned to a large extent today already. Now, for the preferred carbon farming measures, there is the list. Morten has also set up or presented this list. This is just one more listing, like measures like afforestation, which might not be applicable in many regions, because if you want to stay to the agricultural production, of course, you can't simply say, well, we are going to increase the area of forests. Then the catch and the cover crops and the crop residue management, which is very important and is has been adopted in large regions already. Then also the use of manure and compost, tillage management, rewettings, then measures in relation to organic or regenerative farming, the grassland management, which is also very important. And of course, there might be some further measures possible. And this is, of course, also a very important thing. So how do we measure the success or not success of these measures? The validation method, there have been lots of projects that are concentrating on this question, especially this MRV. So there are some projects still going on. We heard some examples during the meeting of the European Soil Observatory. I think it was 2 weeks ago. So what we definitely need is a science-based standard. So everything that we are applying within this framework should have a sound scientific basis. So this could either be the analysis of soil sampling, soil samples, not only for the total organic carbon, but maybe also further methods could be thought of. However, we still have the problem of soil sampling, which is probably the most expensive part of the analysis part. Personally, I think that modeling, although in our statistics it has been shown that modeling is not so much applied at the moment, modeling might be one of the key validation methods for the future, because if we are able to have very valid models proven by long-term experiments, so this could be a means of proving that some of the measures really lead to an enrichment and sequestration of carbon in the soil. The remote sensing is still in discussion, I would say, because the applicability with this, especially with respect to the carbon in the soil, is still unclear to some extent. So this is something that is still also in development. However, the data are available, and many groups are working on this and trying to find a solution to identify the carbon content or the changes of the carbon content with respect to the remote sensing. And as said before, we should use approved standards, internationally approved standards for these measurements that are undertaken here, because otherwise the comparability is not possible. And this could then result in certificates and labels. So especially also with, if thinking of the supply chain, of course, the carbon credits are a topic, and to our opinion, it's very important to have this sustainability, and this sustainability should be documented. So not that we have a system that works for 10 years and after the 10 years nobody cares anymore what's going on, and all the carbon stored could go back to the atmosphere in the worst case. Finally, how should it be reported? Of course, we have this possibility to have national inventory reports. So maybe this is also something that will come up with the soil monitoring law to some extent. It has also been already mentioned that especially for the greenhouse gas inventories, there should be a possibility to include these data into the greenhouse gas inventories, and this would also mean that there is a kind of reporting, especially for the private initiatives, to the national institutions that are doing this greenhouse gas inventory to report the results, so that it can be also included in this greenhouse gas inventory. And this, of course, is on the EU level, but this should, of course, also be on the national level. And also a possibility could, of course, be research papers or studies or reports, but this is more or less a voluntary thing, and you should consider in your local situation if this means of reporting could also be an additional possibility to tackle with these problems. And then finally, the idea of the governance. So who is in charge and what is the individual role of the individual institution? So as there probably will be some regulation coming up from the EU, there will be an increasing role of official institutions, wherever they are situated, whether they are in the government, in the ministries, or in chambers, or in agencies that are owned by the state, like, for example, my own agency. So this is also something that has to be considered in the development of your local ideal system. Also, associations could play a role to some extent, and of course private companies, but I think the main point would then be to try to cooperate, to find a cooperation between all these involved institutions. Probably this will not be that easy, especially with respect to private companies who are giving carbon credits. However, I think, especially thinking of the reporting situation, with respect to the greenhouse gas situation, I think this cooperation is a very crucial thing within the development of these systems. So this should also be taken into account, and the sooner there is a communication between all the involved partners, the better it probably would be in the end. So these are the different points that we have been thinking of, and finally there should be a kind of a development of a matrix where you have the different topics like mentioned here, and you could order them by priority, for example, if thinking of management options or whatsoever, or financing schemes. And then using this matrix, there might be the possibility for you to figure out or to filter out the most appropriate system for your situation. Of course, there is also the problem that you have to think of which institutions should then be involved, and finally to have a possibility to put this system then into practice. So probably there also have to be the development of ideas on how to put it into practice, and you can orientate yourself on best practice examples that have been or that will be listed probably in the report of our project, but also in the publications that we have. Okay, so this was a short outline of our suggestions for the roadmap. And now we would like to involve you a little bit more, not only in the chat. So we have prepared a Mentimeter work for you. And we've set up different questions. So you have received some of the or the first ideas with respect to the questions already. However, in preparing this workshop, we have changed these questions a little bit. And the first thing that I want you to know is, or that I ask you to do is to go to the website www.menti.com. And then we have a special request. As you can see here, we would like to have different different approaches by different groups. So what we would like to have is, if you think that you are a practitioner, a farmer, or also in the recommendations, so that then I would ask you to take the first code, the green one. And then if you are a researcher or if you are a representative of an NGO, then you take the yellow code. And if you are a policymaker or if you are working in the administration, then you take the blue code. So I will give you a little bit of time to maybe write down these codes, or already to enter them into the Menticom website. Okay. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Sophia will open up the Menti presentations. Yeah, so here we are already. And now we can start with the first question. Yeah, you are already working. Okay, I don't have to say anything. So the question is, what are the most important drivers for starting carbon farming? We are going to develop a word cloud here. Okay. So there are still some things coming in. So, and as you can see already, there are different approaches by the different groups. If going to the practitioners, we say the most important topic obviously is something to directly raise the carbon content in the soil, namely biochar, which is very interesting. There should also be a kind of a right compensation in the field. Robustness should there be in the field. A close cooperation is necessary. Probably this is also something that has been mentioned already, so that the farmers applying these measures should be networking to a large extent. And if going for the researchers and the NGOs, we see that the incentives, so actually this is something I would have suspected to be on the left side, on the green side of the practitioners, that the incentives are in the center, but also topics like sustainability and soil health. So soil health, of course, with this additionality that we have. And so somebody has not muted his microphone. I think it's somebody from Portugal. So thanks. And for the policymakers and administration, the improvement of soil health seems to be the most important thing. Also things like willingness or production security, governmental approval, and the financial benefits are also there, but not as much in the center. So the improvement of soil health probably in the area of policymakers and administrators is something that might be connected also with the upcoming soil monitoring law. Okay. Well, thanks for the first round. And the second round should also be again a word cloud. And here you can see the question: what do you think are the barriers for the successful adoption and implementation of carbon farming? So we have heard from our stock takes and our inventories that we have made what to our mind are the main problems that occur, but we would like to know your opinion. And you can start immediately.
Sorry for interruption. Can you share the code for the Mentimento? Oh, Mentia. Can you share the code?
You can see it on the screen.
You can see it still on the screen. It's rather small, but you can read it on the screen. It's on the top of the individual screens that you have. So I don't know to which group do you belong. Then I can tell it.
I don't know either.
Are you
Well,
a
are you a
researcher?
practitioner, a researcher, or a policymaker?
Researcher.
Okay, then the code is 439 453 39.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So maybe also for Martin, you are having a look at the chat. So if there is something coming up very prominently, you also might join the conversation. Okay. So there is still some movement in the word cloud, of course. Maybe we wait for some other seconds. But it seems, at least for the practitioners, there are economic aspects are very, very important. We see the word economic, we see the words lack of incentives and the word incentive. So I think the economic aspect for the practitioners is a very, very important one. And so if there was kind of an improvement with respect to the economic background, there would also be a better or an increasing adoption of these things. The second thing, at least to my interpretation, is the knowledge of the benefits. So we should also work more on telling people what are the benefits, not only with respect to the carbon removal, but maybe also with respect to other ecosystem services. As for researchers and NGOs, very prominently the word greenwashing is occurring. So this is something that might be a factor for the farmers, or which is a factor, but not especially for the farmers, but more from the outside view, I would say. So that there, of course, is the danger that some of the private companies use this carbon credit market to create kind of greenwashing. What also occurs to a large extent is knowledge, once again, and also the lack of standards. So we are still in the methodological discussion, I think, and this possible lack of standards on how to really measure the changes of the carbon in the soil are still on the table, and partly also the regulation. And then for the policymakers and the administrators, the administration itself seems to be a very important thing. We also have, again, the lack of knowledge as an important point, and it comes up in several of these keywords that are mentioned here. Also, the cost-benefit ratio for the farmers, of course, is a very important thing. So again, you can see the different groups have different sides and different aspects of the problem. So thanks a lot for your input. And we can go to the next, again, a word cloud question. So we have been talking about the barriers. And now we would like to know, do you have any ideas about the solutions for raising the acceptance of the carbon farming? Because this is, of course, something that is very important also for the development of a roadmap, to know what are the most important factors that should be included in a carbon farming scheme to be accepted by the practitioners, but also, of course, by the institutions and administrators. Okay. So you might start entering your keywords. Nobody has any solutions, I'm afraid. No, here we are. Okay. Okay, so the first groups are evolving. So obviously for the practitioners, there are several aspects more or less equal, like the raising of awareness. Of course, again, the economic incentives, the environmental benefits, support with consultancy. I think this is also a very important thing, so that people are not left on their own, so to say. An EU MRV system that is proposed, also the acknowledgement of certain measures, but there is nothing that's really that clearly in the center. So there are different suggestions, more or less weighed equally. So this is a very interesting thing. So maybe there are really different approaches still. Then on the researcher and NGO side, we have in the center clear guidelines. I think this is a very important thing. And so maybe our roadmap at least could be a basis to develop these clear guidelines. And secondly, communication and information. So we still obviously have to work on the raising of the awareness for these carbon farming systems. So maybe also the developments on the European level will help with respect to this. However, this is definitely something that has to be worked on in the different member states. And the policymakers and the administration is also of the same opinion that education and training is more or less in the center. Also kind of demonstration farms and pilot projects are very important. Of course, again, the financial benefits and the incentives should be mentioned and be part of the schemes in the main in the center. However, education and training, communication, information is really very important to all of you. Okay. So, and there is still one more word cloud question. So you are used to it at the moment, and I'm convinced that there will be very interesting answers once again. So what do you think we have shown this decision tree to you, and I hope you still have something in your mind with respect to the this roadmap, this decision tree. So is there anything that has been missing in this decision tree, to your opinion? Or are the most important aspects covered by this decision tree? Or do you have any request for changing something in this decision tree?
Perhaps while we're reflecting on this, we can show the screen with the decision tree. One request that could be relevant.
Okay, Sophia, could you show this decision tree once again?
Yes, trying to in a second.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe I can try to show it because I have it. Here we are. So I hope you can see the decision tree now. So we had to define the common principles, to define the aim, then to take care of the local characteristics with respect to soil and climate and things like that. Then a decision about the financing scheme and the measures. Then the preferred validation method. And then the reporting. And last but not least, the governance structure. So these are the points that should be considered if setting up this carbon farming scheme in the first place. So I will still leave it a little bit on the screen so that everybody can have a closer look still before I then give back to Sophia to see what's come up additionally. Okay. So now let's have a look at the results, Sophia. So if going to the practitioners, we again see different points rather equally. Again, there is awareness and knowledge that should be also part of this decision tree. So like how to inform people or setting up some possibilities for raising this awareness. Then we have incentive for actions, which probably is part of the financing scheme. Has historical practices, which is very interesting, I think, and also historical data. Maybe also a compensation structure. So what happens if there's something goes not in the right direction? Okay. So then we have the researchers. Also a lot of different ideas coming up. The local characteristics in the center and also the awareness in the center. So I think the awareness should be, and the information should be also to some part considered in the decision tree. And then a lot of different ideas, which we will probably then analyze to a large extent afterwards. And for the administration, unfortunately, just one answer, and this is repetition, although I have to admit that practical implementation, practical recommendation. Okay, so the practical part should be also be included to some extent, or somewhere at least in the decision tree. Okay. So thanks a lot, and now to relax a little bit, we stop having these word cloud answers in the first place, and we will give you a choice, because we would like to know how can the effectiveness of a result-based carbon farming system be proven best to your mind. So is it by the means of soil analysis? Is this by means of modeling? Is it by means of concerning emission factors? Is it considering remote sensing? Or is it something else that we haven't mentioned yet? And if it's that, if that is the case, please specify what is missing to your opinion in the chat so that we can have a look at it finally. Take your time in thinking.
That is in
Okay. So for the practitioners, there seems to be a picture that has equally the soil analysis and the remote sensing, and also the emission factors. For the part of the researchers, we have the large majority with soil analysis. And for the administration and policymakers, unfortunately, only 3 answers. However, the soil analysis is in favor. And secondly, there is modeling. Okay. And remote sensing is also on second place with respect to the research group. Okay. So thanks for this. And we have also been discussing about the question on how long should a carbon farming system be in place. And so the question, what do you think, what is the optimum time duration for the carbon farming project? Is it 1 year or 1 to 5 years? Is it 5 to 10 years, or is it more than 10 years? Okay. There seems to be a strong tendency towards the bigger than 10 years. So more or less for all the groups. So the longer the carbon farming scheme is in place and works, the better. Obviously. Still, there are some in favor of shorter periods. Okay. So I think this is done. And the next question would then be, we have been thinking of the duration, but we have to prove somehow on what is the effect. And we have been discussing about, on the one hand, action-based, and on the other hand, result-based. And you have the possibility now to rank. So if you strictly stick to an action-based system, please use 1. And if you strictly stick to a result-based system, use 10. And if you somehow in between, then you can be on this range between 1 and 10, on this scale between 1 and 10. So that we can see what is the most preferred option between these two different approaches. So once again, 1 for action-based system and 10 for a result-based system. And if you are saying, well, it should be a hybrid system, then take 5. Okay. So it seems to be that there is a slight, at least for the practitioners and the researchers, there is a slight tendency towards the result-based system. A little bit more pronounced for the researchers, and for the policymakers and the administration, it's more the action-based system, which is actually a little bit surprising for me, because especially for policymakers and administrators, the result-based system is probably seen as the most easy to administer, maybe, but this could be the wrong interpretation of my side. Okay. So thanks for this, and then we come to the next question. And okay, I think there is a slight mistake from our side, because we have had this already. So we can go to the next question, Sophia.
I think the difference was for result-based or action-based. This is now for action-based.
Yeah. Sorry. It's not the same question. Now we are for the action-based carbon farming system. So how can this be proven best? So we have the same choices as for the result-based system, but maybe other approaches. So if we're just relating to the action-based approach, how can we prove that the action is sufficiently effective? Okay. So unfortunately, well, the number of votes is increasing. That's positive. So, and for the practitioners and the researchers, we have a rather similar picture. We can see that soil analysis and remote sensing are favored. Modeling is on second place. Emission factors are last from the votings, and there are no other ideas actually. And for the policymakers and administrators, the modeling seems to be the most effective and most important thing, and remote sensing on the second place. Okay. And now the next question then would be, how should the payment be organized for the carbon farming? So we had these 3 different approaches that have been presented by Martin already. So we have on the one hand the voluntary carbon market. Then we have this inclusion in the commodity chain, in the supply chain. And finally, we have public payments, mostly in connection with the Common Agricultural Policy. So what would you think is the most effective way to finance the carbon farming with respect to the current situation? Okay. Still give you some time to consider. Okay, so for the practitioners, it seems to be that the commodity chain is really an interesting thing, and this is also something that I have been censoring, so to say, within the community, so that the farmers really have a tendency to cooperate with bigger retailers or bigger secondary producers who would like to include the carbon farming principles to their product. And so this is obviously for the practitioners the most important thing, and the second thing is the public payment. Whereas for research and NGOs, public payment is on the first place, and the commodity chain is second. And interestingly, in both cases, the voluntary carbon market is last, and the same picture we also see for the policy makers and administrators, so that the other two options obviously are more attractive than the voluntary carbon market. A very interesting result we have here. Okay, so we are nearly through. There is still one more word cloud question I would like to raise. So we have been talking about the reporting and MRV systems, and we have also been talking about additionality and additional ecosystem services or whatsoever that should be included or could be included in carbon farming systems. However, if we have this inclusion, we probably would have to monitor or to measure them as well. So what do you think, what could help us also to prove the additional benefits of carbon farming if it was measured as well? So which additional environmental effects should be included in the MRV systems that are applied for carbon farming, simply to prove the additionality? So this is maybe not so easy to answer, so I will give you some time for answering this question. So this is maybe also something that could go in line with the current soil monitoring directive, where we are discussing possible indicators to be used. And this maybe could also be included somehow in the MRV systems for carbon farming. So for practitioners and researchers, I see that biodiversity and soil health is estimated as very important. However, it's not that easy to measure this, but there are possibilities, of course, and especially with respect to the soil monitoring law, we hope that we will come up with some solutions that are practicable also for us in the laboratories. So biodiversity, soil health, then water in different aspects, water consumption, water quality, water retention. So also the physical aspects are obviously important. Yeah, now we have also some responses from the political group, like biodiversity, soil health, agroecological benefits, nutrient cycle. So these are very important things for us also to think of, especially with respect to methods that could be used to measure all these different aspects. Okay. So thanks a lot for your response. And finally, we have the easy task. We have a yes or no question. Do you think that the carbon farming is sufficiently covered by the carbon removal certificate framework that has been presented by IRENI? Okay. Still leave some time. However, there seems to be a tendency, especially amongst the practitioners and the researchers, that say no. So maybe this is also an information for people working in respective institutions that are involved in the process of designing this carbon removal certificate framework or giving input. So maybe we should strengthen our efforts to have the carbon farming implemented in this certificate framework to a larger extent. So for the policy, it seems to be equal. Yes or no? Okay. So I would like to thank you very much for your responses. And we will definitely analyze this to a large extent, especially the word clouds, because we can then also group words that are more or less with the same meaning, but maybe only another formulation. This definitely will help us a lot in trying to improve our approaches and our reports. And I would like now to hand over again to Martin, whether there have been any more important remarks in the chat already.
Yes, thanks for that, and also thanks for facilitating this exercise. There's quite a lot of discussions in the chat about carbon farming, about certification, especially about cost of certification. Here towards the end of the meeting, I think it would also be fruitful, now that we are a bit fewer, to just allow some of the participants to indicate if they have some oral comments that they want to provide us with, or start a discussion about some of the topics that have been raised during the day, and also additional input to these roadmap that we are developing. Because, I mean, of course, when we are working in this structured format of the Menti, then there will always be the opportunity that something is not really included in the questions that we ask. Yeah, so please feel free to indicate if you have a comment, a question, or reflection you want to share with the rest of us. And while you're considering, we have also seen some requests whether to share the slides from today and recordings, and we'll try to find a way to do that. At least for those who have registered for the event, we have your contact details, so we can provide that for you after the meeting, and also download some of the outcomes from this Mentimeter exercise, so that you can use that in your own work to the extent that this is relevant for you. And when we have further processed your inputs from these discussions, also the final roadmap will be circulated across this group of participants. And yeah, of course, your comments, feedbacks are more than welcome. See if there's anybody indicating.
No, at the moment it seems that there are no further comments.
It seems, yeah.
Here we are.
Frank. Yeah.
Yes, hello. It's Frank from Denmark, and I think what we sometimes are missing, what's going on right now in Denmark, is that we have to maybe to move the farmers away from some areas, from the raised bogs, and that is a quite tough thing that I don't think there is no regulation or schemes or anything that can handle this situation. And I think you have to talk more about this topic as scientists, because in my eyes, some farmers can't live out there any longer. They have to be taken totally out of production if we should succeed. And I think that is a very hot topic right now in Denmark. But there's a lot of discussions, and the farmers are not so happy, because people want to know what they're going to do. But you can have 5, 10 or 15 years where people don't know what to do if we don't take any decisions. And EU should also face this topic much more, because we have huge areas of organic soils in the whole Europe. But that was just a comment we are looking into facing right now, and at the same time, we are talking about a tax in Denmark also. So that's just a comment that I think EU should face more. That is not so easy as talking on PowerPoint. Sorry.
Yeah, that's completely right. I just wanted to add that recently we have started a project in Austria where we have a look at the peatlands or the wetlands that are currently in use, and we will try to set up a kind of a guideline on how to decide whether these wetlands should be re-wetted once more, or whether they should stay in production. So this is really a very delicate task, probably, and we have managed to bring all the different groups together in one consortium. So because we said that we would like to have the discussion within the consortium better than afterwards, because if one of the group would then have this project running, probably the other group, so let's say we have on the one hand kind of NGOs, and on the other hand we have agriculture chambers, and probably they will come to different conclusions. And so what we are trying to do is to have both groups in one consortium, and we were successful in this, and we are now starting with the project, and we hope that we, according to the discussions that we have within the project, will find a way to find solutions that are okay for both parties. However, I completely agree that in some cases it probably will be a hard decision. Yeah.
And I think also from a policy perspective, with the nature restoration law, there's a big focus on peatlands and also making land use change on some of these areas, rewetting, and encouraging different forms of production with the more water content, so that the organic material is not converted. And especially in the northern part of Europe, these areas are widespread, and therefore it's also an important aspect to consider nationally in policy making. And for the most part, this hasn't taken place yet in many of the countries. So I do agree with your comment that it's super important that it's a topic that we pick up as researchers, and I suppose also for the policymakers that are still hanging on. This is also a big concern in policy making, how we can design solutions for these areas, so that we don't end up alienating the entire farming community that is owning these areas at present. And I think also, just mentioning the living labs that will be established in the context of Mission Soil. There was recently a call that focused on carbon farming, and some of these areas can also be addressed, I think, in this aspect. And I think establishing some of these living labs to showcase both to the farming community, but also trying to share experiences across different European contexts in the context of these living labs can be an important lever in bringing out some of these experiences. Yeah, somebody asked you for the name of the project that you mentioned, Andreas.
The name is rather simple. It's MOIST. But as I've said before, we are just starting the work. So we will have the kickoff meeting probably in January, at the beginning of January, and then start the field work in the course of next year. And this is, by the way, it's funded by the Austrian Biodiversity Fund.
Yeah, great. And I see there's a new comment coming in that we should put soil health at the first priority of all government discussions about sustainability and rural development. And I think this is just a great comment to end with. And unless there is any sort of further comments, I would thank you very much for your participation here today. It's been super fruitful with your comments and also being able to share this outcome of our project with all of you. It's super interesting, and here towards the end of the project, it's also nice to see that we have produced a coherent output that can be communicated in this cross-disciplinary context and with stakeholders that are both policymakers, researchers, and practitioners. So with that in mind, thanks a lot for your communication here today. And please, if you have any further questions, comments, reflections along the way, please feel free to mail us or get in touch otherwise. Yeah. And another point is also when it comes to monitoring, reporting, and verification. A lot of these ideas also live on in various projects under the Mission Soil. And I think a lot of us are involved in some of these. So in that sense, it continues. And with MRV, for instance, there are two projects going on currently, with the MARVIC project and the project MRV for SOC, where these topics are also being addressed, and where we are providing some advice for the Commission on how to design these MRV systems. But without any further ado, I would just thank you all for joining in and listening to our discussions here today.